Each man must do his bit.
Hello, good day, and welcome to Public Interest. This is its first in a series of programs that will be aired every Friday. I am Gabriela Patram. With me is former President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and leader of the People's National Congress Reform, retired Brigadier, Mr. David Granger. Sir, thank you very much for joining us.
It's good to be back, Gabby.
And first, let me ask, how have you been?
We've been doing a lot of groundwork. You know, I know people have complained that they haven't seen me, but we're doing a lot of groundwork. We had to review, what happened in 2020, and before we moved ahead, during September, October, November, I paid visits to many towns and outlying communities. So we've been paying attention to the grassroots of the party. And I'm happy to re-engage with the public interest. As you know, there was a slight interruption, but we're on the road again.
Great. So I want us to begin our discussions talking a little bit about the coalition. In July of this year, the Partnership for National Unity will be celebrating its 10th anniversary. And the coalition of the APNU and the AFC would have observed their 6th anniversary up until last year's general and regional elections. Those 5 years in office would have gone down as a remarkable episode in Guyana's history. How did the partnership and the coalition survive?
Well, you could very well ask why we came into being, why were we born in the first place? Because if you understand why we were born, you'd see why we're still alive today. We were born at the right time in Guyanese history. I think the bulk of the population was quite fed up with the first decade of the decade of phantom squads and the great flood in 2005 and the mismanagement and the failed projects, the fiber optic cable and the Skeldon factory. So we were there at the right time, and the APNU was born with a vision that we are going to give you a good life. We are going to make this place better for you and your children in the future. So we were able to attract 5 parties into the APNU, the partnership. Of course, you had the Guyana Action Party, which is largely based in the hinterland, the Justice for All Party, the National Front Alliance, the Working People's Alliance, and the PNC. So we were the original 5 fingers on the hand, and I always used to tell people, try to, get a bowl of rice and try to pick it up with one finger and see, it makes a difference when you have 5 fingers. So we were the right party, or the right partnership at the right time in Guyanese history. And I was satisfied at that time in 2011 when we saw what had happened in the previous 10 years, previous 23 years, and where we needed to go. And I was very happy that, the 5 of us were able to share the vision of making Guyana an orderly place, a prosperous place, particularly for our children. We had a vision of the future. And that vision stayed with us. We were able to stay together for 10 years because we still shared that vision. And in 2015, we had a coalition with the Alliance for Change, and we were able to impress AFC with our vision. And they came on board, and of course there was a Cummingsburg Accord, the famous Valentine's Day Accord, and it was renewed on Christmas Eve Day in 2019. But we are very happy to deliver to the Guyanese people for the first time in our political history a partnership which stayed together for 10 years. Never happened before. And a coalition government which stayed in office for 5 years. So I believe it is our vision, and I'm not an immodest person, but I must say my leadership, the experience which I brought to the partnership under the coalition, I think people accepted that I was a good manager of these 6 different parties, and that I had the experience, and that I too had the vision. I shared the vision. So those were the reasons why we came together. Those were the reasons why we stayed together. And those are the reasons why we're still together up to the present day.
Do you think it will expire?
Expire? I think it will expand. I think it will expand. I see the coalition remaining together. We have an accord, even though now it is in opposition. But I am convinced that other parties will understand the reason why we came together in the first place. And as I said, APNU is a big benab, and we welcome other parties. The important thing about the APNU, Gabby, let me say this, is that when people look at the APNU, they can see every aspect of Guyanese society represented there, whether it's religious, whether it is racial, whether it's regional, whether it's business interests, everybody can look at the APNU and see there's a place for his interests or what he wants to see happen in life. Even if he's living at Warrior now, even if he's living in Mabaroom or living in Oriala, that person there, that citizen knows that he has a representative in the APNU. When I got into office in the 10th Parliament, that is 2011, that's the year we were founded, every partner had a seat in Parliament. It wasn't big or small, every partner had a seat in Parliament. And I think they realized that my fairness, was evident in the way APNU functioned. So expiration, there's nothing further from my mind. We're not going to expire. As long as the leaders of the parties, I know we've had 2 withdrawals, but as long as the leaders of the parties share that vision. APNU is not about office, APNU is about service to the public.
Coming back to the withdrawals, like you mentioned, you would have had 2 withdrawals. Mistress Savitri Sharma from the Justice for All Party, she's the General Secretary, and Mr. Takuma, who's also the General Secretary of the Working People's Alliance. They would have had their withdrawals from the Partnership of National Unity in wake of last year's elections. What has the impact been because of those withdrawals, sir?
Well, Gabi, it is significant that you should mention in the wake of the elections. Because there was no threat of withdrawal before, the threats came, or the actual withdrawals came after the elections results were announced. And let me say this. Politics, yes, it's important to go into office because you cannot implement the promises you made without going into office. But political service is also about fulfilling the people's needs. And you don't have to be an MP to fulfill the people's needs. You have to have a vibrant party which goes out into the communities and finds out what the people need and make representations through the MPs. And I believe that the withdrawals of those 2 parties, I had hoped they would have been temporary, but they might have been a consequence of the extraction process. That, in the case of the Justice for All Party, Mr. Jaipal Sharma, who had served the party well, I think, and he was a junior minister, right up to the 11th Parliament. I think he was replaced by the leadership of the Justice for All Party. And in the case of the Working People's Alliance, I think there was some agreement about the extraction, but the person who was extracted, and we must bear this in mind, that APNU plus AFC, 1 list, not 6 lists, 1 list. And the extraction was in accordance with the lists which were presented to me. And in my judgment, I made the correct decisions to ensure that we had the type of cohort in the National Assembly which could fulfill the mission of the APNU plus AFC. I wouldn't want to dissect the motives. All I know, I received letters from Mrs. Sharma and Mr. Ogunse, and I believe I acted correctly, and I would like them to come back to the partnership at some stage or the other. But it came about only after the election results were announced. And after every election, there will be winner or loser, although we've gone to the courts, and we hope that on Monday we will have some announcement in our favor. But it was about the seats, about parliamentary seats. But the APNU is not driven by occupancy of seats, it is driven by service to the people of this country.
And you stand firm and strong that over those 5 years you would have served the people?
Yes, we did our best. There have been a few hiccups, there are a few obstacles, but we did our best to find out what the people wanted and what they needed, and to provide the quality of service that they deserve. And that is why, even with the results which were presented on the 2nd of August, we represented our people well, and we have selected a cohort in the National Assembly which will continue to represent those 218,000 people who came out to support the APNU. And let me assure them that their votes were not wasted, and that we will continue to work to ensure that the things that they wanted to improve the quality of their lives will be delivered. They and their children, once we have a strong APNU AFC representation in Parliament, we will continue to struggle to make sure that their children get a good quality of life. And that's what they're doing now, because I think there are some threats to that quality of life.
So let's talk a little bit about the People's National Congress reform. It's the largest party in the APNU AFC coalition. During 2020 and up until now, it would have come in for high criticism, visible and audible on social media platforms. You yourself has been recipient of criticisms, and there has been calls for Congress to be held and for the leadership of the party to be changed. What are the basis for those demands, and how do you respond to your critics? What do you say to your support base?
Well, again, as in the case of the partners in the APNU, some of these calls were not made before the 2nd of August. I'm aware of the criticisms, and my party, the PNC, because you asked a specific question, I'll give you a specific answer, is governed by a constitution. Only 2 days ago, we had the Central Executive Committee, which administers the affairs of the party or makes decisions in between Congresses and the meeting of the General Council. We have a General Council, and we have a regional structure. So between Congress, the Constitution, Congress, and the Central Executive and the General Council, these are the 4 main institutions. As far as leadership is concerned, I have no problem with having a Congress. I had to compete in a special Congress to become presidential candidate, and every Congress after that, after 2011, I have won. Mr. Granger challenged me, and I won. Mr. Norton challenged me, and I won. So Congress is not a problem. It is required in the Constitution, but we explained that because of COVID, you cannot bring 1,000 people into a super spreader event, in Congress Place. In fact, we would be subject to arrest by the police. We explained, and we have done a study to see how we can have a form of Congress given the present situation. And that report has been presented to the Central Executive Committee. For sure, we cannot have a face-to-face Congress in the middle of a pandemic. I think, I didn't check the numbers, but we have probably lost about 270 deaths by now. And
Might be a little bit more, yes.
it might be a little more. But, only a month ago we were talking about, the number of deaths, but it's galloping, it's out of control. So having a face-to-face Congress is a question that is being investigated by a special ad hoc advisory committee. And depending on what that committee recommends, Central Executive Committee will decide. So Congress is not an issue which cannot be determined, but as I said, it is a matter that is now before the Central Executive Committee. As far as my leadership is concerned, I am constitutionally elected and I can only be removed in accordance with the Constitution. So I know there's noise out there, but I'm not worried about that. I faced noise before. I faced rivals before and other competitors. But in the final analysis, the members of the PNC know me. They know that I have moved the performance of the PNC from what it was before in the 2000s, early 2000s. I am the first leader of the PNC to be elected president since 1985. I am the first leader of the PNC to have been elected president of the country since 1985, since Mr. Desmond Hoyt. So they know that. They're not all on Facebook, but they know the truth about my performance, and they know that I always abide by the constitution of the party. The CEC is held regularly. We had a little suspension early this year because of the illness of two persons, but CEC is functioning, and Congress will be held when CEC decides it could be held safely.
When are you expecting an update or let's say another report from them? Do you have like a time frame?
Well, the last meeting of the Central Executive Committee, as I said, was convened on Wednesday, and I have to discuss with the chairman, Mr. Walter Lawrence, and the General Secretary when that adjourned meeting will be held.
Okay. I just want
Maybe it's certainly going to be held within a fortnight's time.
Fortnight's time. Okay. You are, during your 5 years and up until now, you've been a very loved president. So just on the area, a little bit more on critics, you would have received some criticism from your support-based Guyanese citizens, and so what do you say to them now that they're hearing from you after, a period of time?
I'm not sure that I follow you closely, but I know that I received the support, the broad support of my colleagues and the members of my party. And I had about 16 very enthusiastic rallies during my campaign. And there was widespread disappointment at the announcement of the results on the 2nd of August. And as a result of that, as a result of the results, we have gone to the courts. And as you know, on Monday the 26th, we expect to hear from the Chief Justice on her ruling. But we made a tremendous effort, and I believe that what I said prior to the elections is that elections in Guyana will always be close. There is no landslide. And I conditioned and advised my supporters to expect a close finish. And we have 131 seats according to the GCOM report, and the PPP has 133 seats. It is reasonably close, and there's one independent seat, so to speak. But arithmetic of politics, arithmetic of elections should not be ignored. It takes about 7,000 votes to put one person in the National Assembly. And, prior to the elections, I had advised all of my partners to aim at delivering constituencies so that there could be broad-based representation. And once we have the turnout and once we have the support of our partners, I'm convinced APNU will continue to win. But the partnership is not something that is ornamental. It is a working relationship. And I'm convinced that the supporters on the ground there, the people I've met, the people I've interacted with, would like to see the APNU back in office. And we will try harder next time, but I'm not disappointed. We will continue through our parliamentary group, through the opposition, to represent the interests of the ordinary people of this country. And I'm convinced that when they see what we're doing in or out of office, they wouldn't drift away from us. What happened, or what was announced on the 2nd of August, is not a defeat. You know, it has encouraged me to do a closer review and introspection. And that is why I've been going out into the regions. That is why I've been doing these outreaches. You know, and that's why they're not only thank you meetings. Of course, I say thanks. I've been to the regions to tell people thanks, to tell my supporters thanks. But it's also encouragement to continue to examine the party structure and work towards regaining office.
Okay. Still on the topic of elections, in the 2020 elections, we would have seen a number of small parties, ANO, TCI, among others.
Mm-hmm.
However, they have been silenced or quiet since the announcement of the 2020 elections. Do you think there is a future, or what is the future of small parties in Guyana?
There is a future for small parties. If I could paraphrase a well-known quotation, you know, God loves ordinary people, that's why he made so many of them. Perhaps God loves small parties, that's why he made so many of them. But a small party has limitations, has a role to play, and APNU is that big benab, is that umbrella which has accommodated smaller parties. This is a big country, and when you start campaigning, you realize how expensive it is to fly to some destinations, even to move about, you know, certain regions, by river, by plane, by road. And small parties have small assets. Small parties which appeal to sections of the community also have certain limitations. In Guyana, it is recognized that we are multi-ethnic, multiracial. The moment you say, I am a Muslim party, or this is an Indian party, or an African party, well, if you declare yourself a Muslim party, Hindus won't be attracted to you, you know. And if people feel that the small party is only sectional, you know, it will not win widespread support.
Sure.
My party, the PNC, is the N in the PNC is national. We represent people of all ethnic groups, of all religions, throughout the country. But the moment a small party says, you know, we're only for Americans, we're only for East Indians, we're only for Africans, we're only for, you know, Muslims or Hindus or Christians, that party can only survive with a larger partner like APNU.
Okay.
We accept that, you know, a particular group, ethnic or religious, may require special representation. And our constitution protects, you know, all citizens, and it has special protection for indigenous people. That's why I had the first indigenous vice president. But a party that professes particularism will never be truly nationalistic, except that it brings its concerns into a partnership like APNU. And that is the mystery of small parties. We appeal to small parties. But when you look at what happened in 2020, the 7 small parties that participated probably got about 8,000 votes. I would not like to feel that those 8,000 citizens are unrepresented. And unfortunately, as you use the word mute or they've gone silent, that seems to be the impression. Okay. Every citizen must be able to say at the end of elections, this particular person represents me in the National Assembly, represents my religion, represents my constituency, represents my region. And it should not be that a party arises, you know, like a Jumbie umbrella and then disappears. So I hope that those parties remain in existence and do not disappear from the scene, But I welcome them into the big benab of the APNU. So whatever your concerns are, let the small parties come into the APNU. I've successfully run a partnership of 5 parties for 5 years, for 10 years. I've successfully run a coalition of 6 parties. And I would say that those small parties have a role to play by ensuring that every citizen is represented, every citizen has a voice. But they should not misuse that role by feeling that they need to get a seat in Parliament. What they need to do is get a place at the table of APNU. They need to come into the APNU Big Benab.
Interesting. So I want us to switch a little bit and talk about Parliament. We're in the 12th Parliament. And you would have made some drastic changes in the composition of the APNU's parliamentary group in Parliament. You and some major or sort of senior personnel did not enter Parliament. However, I am aware that during your tenure as president, you would have been pushing and you would have implemented a number of policies to see youth development and development for children. And we see that in the composition in the 12th Parliament. What were your objectives when you were going through that list and you selected these young people?
Politics, my politics or my beliefs, my vision, all of these have been established over a long period of time. First of all, on the 1st of January 2020, before the elections, I announced something called the Decade of Development. That Decade of Development was meant to create a blueprint, a framework for the development of Guyana from 2020 to 2029. And I'm very happy that President Biden in the United States has started to speak about the decade. I don't think in terms of week to week or year to year, like the national budget. I think in terms of, in strategic terms, what do we want to see happening 10 years from now? That vision is very important because we want a cohort of parliamentarians who are likely to be in Parliament, in the National Assembly, throughout that decade of development. Let me say this. The average age of the persons who, and quite a lot of persons, over 20 persons came out of Parliament. The average age of the person who left Parliament, it was 62. The average age of the persons who entered Parliament, 42. So that change that you speak about has actually brought the average age of our parliamentarians much closer to the age that I feel that people should be entering Parliament to give it a 10-year span of office. So that's very, very important. Now, before we went into the coalition, before we went into the Christmas Eve agreement last year, year before last Christmas Eve, 2019, we had a schedule called the core principles. And among those core principles were agreements on gender balance and also youth. And there are other principles. The principles mean exactly what it says. These are the first steps, the basic agreement. And one of those principles was gender equality. And I'm proud to say that right now, the PNC cohort has exact balance between males and females. I think it's the first time in Parliament you can have a major party which has equality, not talking about equality 40 years ago. We're talking about people in Parliament. So it means that males who were traditionally the dominant gender have to accept that women are entitled to equality. It's not a favor. Equality means equality. And right now, there is I think there is exact equality between males in the PNC slate. So we are conforming to that table of core principles. we want to make sure that every constituency is represented. And when somebody comes from East Berbice or West Berbice, that person is, was that born or lives there or worked there, you know. So from every aspect, the cohort that has now gone into Parliament is more representative than ever before. And A, we have a balance of women. B, we have a much younger cohort that will see this decade of development through. We are abiding by the principles of constituency representative, because these people they've not come from space, they've come from the actual constituency. If the critics of the PNC, even inside the PNC or outside, examine those core principles, they will see that the principles have formed a template for the selection of the new cohort. Okay. It is not a cohort that is just being picked, you know, willy-nilly. These are people who are represented in the grassroots. These are people who are younger, and these are people who enjoy, to a greater extent, gender equality than ever before. And when you look at what you want Guyana to be 10 years from now, you know, look, to start with, I did not go into Parliament. Everybody knows my age. I was born in 1945. I'm 75 years old. In a couple of months' time, I'll be 76. I do not want to be in Parliament when I'm 86 or 96. So I have led from the front. I have stepped aside. Now we have created a concept, or convention of term limits. And I reckon that it is reasonable. It is reasonable for a parliamentarian to look forward to serving maybe about 3 terms. Okay. But once you start getting to 4 terms, 5 terms, you know that in some other countries, the Congress or the Senate will have people serving for decades upon decades. Guyana is a young country, it's a developing country, and my intention is that we should have people who could move this decade of development along over the next 5 or 10 years through the 12th Parliament, through the 13th Parliament. Persons who perform well in this 12th Parliament could look forward, to carrying this service over, as long as they satisfy the criteria, into the 13th Parliament and provide continuity. But within continuity, there must be change. And I have changed. I easily could have chosen to go back and lead the opposition, but I let somebody who's younger, and I let a cohort, which is younger, go into the National Assembly. And that's what you have. I think Guyana has, within the APNU AFC coalition in the National Assembly now, a cohort of parliamentarians that will move this country forward throughout the next decade.
I'm putting you on the spot with my final question. I'm sure that you've been listening in and so on. Have they exceeded your expectations? Have they impressed you?
Very much, very much. I think we've made an excellent choice. They're very enthusiastic. Many of them, they are all members, at least for the PNC. They're all card-bearing members of the PNC. I don't know what people think, but these people haven't come from outer space, and we've made sure that they're no dual citizens. They're all members, and they are serving. They're going out. They're making outreaches. They have much to learn. We all had much to learn at the start, but over the next years, you just look at that cohort, and you'll see that they are moving Parliament forward. They're moving the country forward, and I'm sure at the end of it all, not that there's an end, but they are working towards giving every Guyanese child a better life in education, in public health. I think this is a blessed country, and I think we have a blessed cohort in the National Assembly.
Yes, I do agree with you that this country is blessed indeed. Well, sir, that's all the time we have for today's edition of The Public Interest.
So soon?
No, but you will be back with us next Friday,
nice.
Of course. So thank you very much for being with us. And to you, our viewers, we say thank you very much for joining us. Do be safe and good. And on behalf of all of us here at Public Interest, we would like to encourage you to please follow all COVID-19 guidelines. Goodbye.
you.